Hi, everybody. I am TJ Klapprodt, talking to you from Texas this morning, and I'm here to read one of my favorite parts of my novel, Messengers of Ilbeor. It's Legends of Ilbeor, Book 1, and it is a contestant in this year's SPFBOX, which I'm really excited about. Messengers of Ilbeor is an epic fantasy. It's the first of 5, and it details a young woman's journey on her way to discover her true destiny and also to protect the family that she has left. So without further ado, I'll get started with the excerpt, and I hope you enjoy. Though Yuri no longer sounded like birdsong to Alanda, she could not understand much of what was said as she took a seat next to Marine on the stone benches around the central circle. They are simply discussing their days and tonight's festivities, Marine told Alanda, correctly assuming Alanda could not discern the individual phrases of Yuri among so many. Nothing of particular import. Alanda nodded, continuing to strain her ears for familiar words or phrases. She caught greetings of different elves, mostly clad in robes of various colors, set around the edge of the circle. She could understand some random bits of the conversations closest to her. Still, she had her own ability to share when it was time. She only hoped she could do what she needed to in front of so many. A low, monotone whistle, not words, but a wordless call for silence, rang through the crowd with immediate effect. Julian was wearing dark blue robes and looked especially nice, his almond-shaped brown eyes sparkling and his long brown hair tied back with a leather thong. He smiled at the crowd as he seemed to meet each pair of eyes directly, moving around the center to gaze at each of the elves. Occasionally, he would stop and converse for a moment, always in a beautifully intoned form of Yuri that Alanda could barely comprehend. Julian enjoys conversing with us before the beginning of each evening's circle, Marine whispered. Just then, Julian met Alanda's eyes and smiled, speaking for the first time in the time. Alanda from Blackwell, he said formally in a smooth, low voice. You are most welcome here tonight. Thank you, Julian, Alanda replied, bowing her head and touching 2 fingers to her forehead in the L sign of respect. Julian bowed his own head, touching his ears lightly to it before moving his gaze onto the elves sitting next to Alanda and Marine. After Julian had quietly gazed at each member of the circle, he made his way back to the center. The elves and Alanda sat silently. To Alanda, the silence felt sacred, as though it were part of one of the rituals of the sanctum in Blackwell, though she knew the elves held no spiritual belief and that this was the norm for their evening ceremonies. She had overheard it enough times that she was familiar with the ritual. Soon, Julian opened his mouth and sang, his voice low, intense, and soothing. Though Alanda had heard echoes of Julian's song in the evenings from Garrett and Marine's roundhouse, she did not expect the feeling of awe that washed over her as his voice rang into the softly lit dusk. His song was not formed in language. He sang a simple ah, but his intonation was anything but unsophisticated. Alanda's heart flew when he hired his song, and she felt a sense of foreboding when his melody became slow and deep. How can he tell a story without using words? Alanda shivered even in the warmth of the summer night. Julian, though handsome, was not distinctive in looks from the other elves, but as he sang, he seemed imbued with a power, his own form of light and wind, as his robes gently swayed around him and his voice soared. The song was long, and yet somehow it ended too soon. Alanda felt smaller when the last note faded into the night. How? She began in a whisper, but Marine just gently. Julian began whistling in Yuri, and his whistle was lower and more intense than what he had used when instructing Alanda. Alanda, with a practiced ear, caught the notes that named her, and understood enough of what he was saying to know she was next to be called to the center of the circle. Despite her outwardly calm demeanor, she felt as though her insides had turned to jelly. "Alanda," Julian called in the common tongue, his long arms outstretched in welcome. "Come and show us what you have learned." Grasping her small wooden flute, Alanda walked to the center of the circle. Julian smiled, and she was surprised to see his eyes twinkling as though in happiness or even amusement, instead of the seriousness she had come to expect from the elves. He whistled something low and soft in Yuri, and Alanda felt herself relax. Had he just used magic on her? The note differed from what Garrett had used to relax her during her early days in the roundhouse, but somehow she thought he had. As Julian had instructed the day before, Alanda did not speak in the common tongue prior to bringing her flute to her lips. Ever so carefully, she began to play, her eyes downcast and her fingers working mostly from memory. First, she played a greeting and then a simple phrase of gratitude. She could sense more than see the surprise among the elves that she was using their language. What happened next surprised Alanda because it was not something they had rehearsed. As Alanda switched from Yuri to a haunting melody she had created the past week, Julian hummed from behind her. She paused momentarily, startled into silence, but as she met Garrett's eyes and he nodded his encouragement, she played once again. As Alanda's melody rose and fell, so did Julian's humming, and what they created was magical for both for them and for the enthralled elves. A frisson of energy seemed to emanate from the human and the elf as they harmonized. During the song, darkness fell across the circle. Though Alanda knew it was going to happen, it still startled her when the tiny magical lights of the elves came to life on the outsides of the houses and on the circle she played. From an ethereal twilight at the beginning of her music to the light-dappled darkness at the end, it seemed even the light of the evening was reacting to their tune. As she finished with a low, long note and Julian hummed in harmony, Alanda lowered her flute and finally raised her eyes. Most still seemed enthralled, but out of the corner of her eye she saw someone she wasn't expecting to see. Katherine, who Alanda recognized from the distinctive clothing Maureen had described, half hiding behind the trunk of a large evergreen. Katherine, clad in an unbleached linen shirt and a leather jerkin and pants, met Alanda's eyes for the most fleeting moment, but when Alanda blinked, she had disappeared into the darkness behind the trees. Alanda felt Julian's hands lift from her shoulders, and he leaned down and whispered into her ear, "Stay." The word was more a plea than a command, and she wondered why he didn't want her to rejoin the circle. Alanda barely felt herself nod, and she found herself almost paralyzed with all the elves' eyes looking at her expectantly. Was she supposed to play again? She had only prepared the one song and didn't know what they would expect from her. Singing was out of the question. She had been told often enough that she had a pleasant speaking voice, but she couldn't carry a tune. What am I supposed to do? Just as Alanda had decided to quietly walk back to her place beside Maureen, a group of elves, with Garrett at the head, appeared from around the circle. They moved silently on their bare feet, each garbed in robes of white that swished a bit on the forest floor. With a gentle nudge, Julian prompted her to step forward before he circled around her and joined the group. His dark blue robe contrasted starkly with the rest of the group, but Alanda felt as though he looked as though he belonged there, his serious gaze mirroring the others. She felt almost as though she were stripped naked by those stares, and she hoped someone would speak soon. Garrett finally smiled at her, his smooth face suddenly looking more like the familiar elf she had talked to so often. He whistled a formal greeting in Yuri. Alanda, glad for something to do, made the elves' traditional sign of respect and then played the greeting back. Though most of the elves in the groups remained serious, Julian and another, a raven-haired female Alanda had never seen before, joined Garrett in smiling at her. To Alanda's relief, Garrett switched to the common tongue. Alanda from Blackwell, he began, startling her with his use of the formal greeting. You have lived among us for 13 days, and in that time you have not only recovered, but learned much about our clan and our customs. You have even shown yourself able and willing to learn our language, which you have done with great alacrity and attention to detail. You have been highly commended by Grayson, a lifelong friend of this clan. It is for these reasons that the Council of Keelanel has decided to name you, Alanda from Blackwell, Elf Friend. Alanda felt her mouth drop open, but immediately closed it because she did not want the elves to think her uncouth. She had heard of elf friends, people of other races who were honorary members of the clan who had befriended them, but she had never met one. None of the other messengers from Blackwell or the surrounding villages held the title, nor had she even heard of one among the other traveling professions. She stammered a bit as she responded, I am honored, Garrett of Keelanel, to be chosen for such a privilege. Hold out your right hand, Garrett instructed, and she held her hand out palm up. Garrett gently turned it so her palm faced the forest floor. Alanda held her position a little awkwardly, feeling foolish, while Garrett unwrapped the strings from a soft fabric pouch of a material Alanda didn't recognize. When he pulled a small object out of the pouch, Alanda could not help but gasp at the beauty of what he held in his hand. She could see it was a ring, but it was like no other ring she had ever seen. Humans did not have many skilled metalworkers among them. The dwarves usually did such work. Most wore simple silver bands for weddings made by such silversmiths as there were among humans, and only the more intricate work she had ever seen had been when the traveling merchants had come through Blackwell. The circlet of the ring was silver, but the incredible part of the ring was the metalwork. The gemstones of the centerpiece were arranged in a long diamond shape, edged with multifaceted green gemstones with a clear stone at each corner. The middle was an ornate design of clear and green stones with a large clear stone in the very center. The piece glittered in the twinkling light of the elf lamps, making it look almost as if it moved, even though Garrett held it still. Alanda had seen many wonderful things on her journeys. Unusual flowers, trees in the vibrant colors of the fall, and springs bubbling joyously between banks of vivid green moss. Her soul had delighted in these things, but none of them compared to the beauty of the ring Garrett was sliding onto her middle finger. It shone as though it had a light of its own. This is Moonshield, Garrett told her. It's beautiful, Alanda breathed, unable to stop herself from gazing down at her hand. Wear it in remembrance of us and in remembrance that you are one of us. It will remain hidden by day unless you wish it to be seen, but it will protect you by night with wards imbued in the very stones of the centerpiece. You may sleep without trepidation wherever you may be, and your friends in Keelanel will rest easier knowing you're safe from many of the dangers, both of the wild and of civilized places. Alana somehow knew exactly what to do when he had finished speaking. She brought her flute to her lips and played a series of tones, speaking gratitude. She had insisted Garrett teach her this because she wanted to properly thank Marine for healing her. She had never imagined she would use her flute to thank the Council of Keelanel for making her an elf friend. This time, all the elves in the council smiled at her as she played, well pleased. As one, the entire circle of elves stood, faced Alanda, and bowed their heads, touching their foreheads with 2 fingers. So that was one of my favorite scenes from Messengers of Ilbeor, the scene where my main character, Alanda, becomes the first elf friend actually in centuries, though she doesn't know that. You can grab a copy of Messengers of Ilbeor on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, or at www.tjklapprodt.com. Thanks for coming and have a great day.